In spite of the fact that he had asked a question, and presumably desired a reply, the sound of Archie's voice seemed to be more than the young man could endure. It deprived him of the last vestige of restraint. With a rasping snarl, he brought his left fist round in a sweeping semicircle in the direction of Archie's head. Archie was no novice in the art of self-defense. Since his early days at school, he had learned much from the leather-faced professors of the science. He had been watching this unpleasant young man's eyes with close attention, and the latter could not have indicated his scheme of action more clearly if he had sent him a formal note. Archie saw the swing all the way. He stepped nimbly aside, and the fist crashed against the wall. The young man fell back with a yelp of anguish. "Gus!" screamed the girl-friend, bounding forward. She flung her arms round the injured man, who was ruefully examining a hand which, always of an out-size, was now swelling to still further dimensions. "Gus, darling!" A sudden chill gripped Archie. So engrossed had he been with his mission that it had never occurred to him that the lovelorn pitcher might have taken it into his head to follow the girl as well in the hope of putting in a word for himself. Yet such, apparently, had been the case. Well, this had definitely torn it. Two loving hearts were united again in complete reconciliation. But a fat lot of good that was. It would be days before the misguided loony Biddle would be able to pitch with a hand like that. It looked like a ham already, and was still swelling. Probably the wrist was sprained. For at least a week, the greatest left-handed pitcher of his time would be about as much use to the Giants, in any professional capacity, as a cold in the head. And on that crippled hand depended the fate of all the money Archie had in the world. He wished now that he had not thwarted the fellow's simple enthusiasm. To have had his head knocked forcibly through a brick wall would not have been pleasant, but the ultimate outcome would not have been as unpleasant as this. With a heavy heart, Archie prepared to withdraw, to be alone with his sorrow. At this moment, however, the girl-friend, releasing her wounded lover, made a sudden dash for him, with the plainest intention of blotting him from the earth. "No, I say, really," said Archie, bounding backwards. "I mean to say—" In a series of events, all of which had been a bit thick, this, in his opinion, achieved the maximum of thickness. It was the extreme, ragged, outside edge of the limit. To brawl with a fellow man in a public street had been bad, but to be brawled with by a girl, the shot was not on the board. Absolutely not on the board. There was only one thing to be done. It was dashed undignified, no doubt, for a fellow to pick up the old Waukesis and leg it in the face of the enemy, but there was no other course. Archie started to run, and as he did so, one of the loafers made the mistake of gripping him by the collar of his coat. "I got him," observed the loafer. There is a time for all things. This was essentially not the time for anyone of the male sex to grip the collar of Archie's coat. If a syndicate of Dempsey, Carpentier, and one of the zoo gorillas had endeavored to stay his progress at that moment, they would have had reason to consider it a rash move. Archie wanted to be elsewhere, and the blood of generations of Mooms, many of whom had swung a wicked axe in the free-for-all mix-ups of the Middle Ages, boiled within him at any attempt to revise his plans. There was a good deal of the loafer, but it was all soft. Releasing his hold when Archie's heel took him shrewdly on the shin, he received a nasty punch in what would have been the middle of his waistcoat if he had worn one, uttered a gurgling bleat like a wounded sheep, and collapsed against the wall. Archie, with a torn coat, rounded the corner and sprinted down Ninth Avenue. The suddenness of the move gave him an initial advantage. He was halfway down the first block before the vanguard of the pursuit poured out of the side street. Continuing to travel well, he skimmed past a large dray, which had pulled up across the road, and moved on. The noise of those who pursued was loud and clamorous in the rear, but the dray hid him momentarily from their sight, and it was this fact which led Archie, the old campaigner, to take his next step. It was perfectly obvious. He was aware of this even in the novel excitement of the chase, that a chappie couldn't hoof it at 25 miles an hour indefinitely along a main thoroughfare of a great city without exciting remark. He must take cover. Cover! That was the wheeze. He looked about him for cover. "You want a nice suit?" It takes a great deal to startle your commercial New Yorker. The small tailor, standing in his doorway, seemed in no way surprised at the spectacle of Archie, whom he had seen pass at a conventional walk some 5 minutes before, returning like this at top speed. He assumed that Archie had suddenly remembered that he wanted to buy something. This was exactly what Archie had done. More than anything else in the world, what he wanted to do now was to get into that shop and have a long talk about gents' clothing. Pulling himself up abruptly, he shot past the small tailor into the dim interior. A confused aroma of cheap clothing greeted him. Except for a small oasis behind a grubby counter, practically all the available space was occupied by suits. Stiff suits, looking like the body when discovered by the police, hung from hooks. Limp suits, with the appearance of having swooned from exhaustion, lay about on chairs and boxes. The place was a cloth morgue, a Sargasso sea of serge. Archie would not have had it otherwise. In these quiet groves of clothing a regiment could have lain hid. "Something nifty in tweeds?" enquired the business-like proprietor of this haven, following him amiably into the shop. "Or maybe, yes, a nice serge. Say, mister, I got a sweet thing in a blue serge that'll fit you like the paper on the wall." Archie wanted to talk about clothes, but not yet. "I say, laddie," he said hurriedly, "lend me your ear for half a jiffy." Outside, the baying of the pack had become imminent. "Stow me away for a moment in the undergrowth, and I'll buy anything you want." He withdrew into the jungle. The noise outside grew in volume. The pursuit had been delayed for a priceless few instants by the arrival of another dray, moving northwards, which had drawn level with the first dray and dexterously bottled up the fairway. This obstacle had now been overcome, and the original searchers, their ranks swelled by a few dozen more of the leisured classes, were hot on the trail again. "You done a murder?" inquired the voice of the proprietor, mildly interested, filtering through a wall of cloth. "Well, boys will be boys," he said philosophically. "See anything there that you like? There are some sweet things there." "I'm inspecting them narrowly," replied Archie. "If you don't let those chappies find me, I shouldn't be surprised if I bought one." "One?" said the proprietor, with a touch of austerity. "Two," said Archie quickly, "or possibly 3 or 6. The proprietor's cordiality returned. "You can't have too many nice suits," he said approvingly. "Not a young feller like you that wants to look nice. All the nice girls like a young feller that dresses nice. When you go out of here in a suit I got hanging up there at the back, the girls'll be all over you like flies round a honey-pot." "Would you mind," said Archie, "would you mind, as a personal favor to me, old companion, not mentioning that word, girl?"